All right, everybody, how you all doing this morning or afternoon, depending on where you please. Let me go ahead and first and foremost welcome you. We're still waiting for some attendees to come on, but I think in the interest of time, it's going to be very important for us all to get going. I'm glad you guys can make it. Right now, you see on the screen a platform for change. This is going to be an NSPRA member virtual town hall. I'm excited to have it today. We've got a professional on the line who I'm going to introduce to you in a moment. But as we're getting prepared for that, I just want to welcome you and kind of explain how things are going to go today. First and foremost, today's session is going to be recorded. I've gotten a lot of requests from people who've asked, how am I going to be able to access this later on after today? And so we're going to make sure that this is recorded and available for all registrants and really anyone who wants to take advantage of understanding the rich dialogue that we have planned here today. So I'm glad to have everybody here. Moving forward, this is what we're looking for today. I want you to engage with us. We are in a webinar format, which means that it's not going to be the traditional Zoom call kind of style that we've been used to over the last few months over coronavirus. Partially because of the scale of this, we had over 100 people register, and then some more came in this morning, but mostly because of the topic and the sensitivity of this topic. I don't want people to feel put on the spot or feel like they have to address and stand by things if they have questions that they might not be comfortable asking with their face or their name on it. So what we're going to be able to do, and I'll explain on the next slide how engagement's going to work. We do want to engage with you today. We do have a few polls, so where you're able to go ahead and enter some information. We're going to try one in a second. We also have ways that you can engage directly. You see Dr. Elam on here, and I'm going to introduce her formally in a moment. But more importantly, you're going to be able to raise your hand. You're going to be able, we can unmute you. So again, you can just ask the question. If we do unmute you when you raise your hand, we're going to ask you to identify just where you're from. That'll help us get a better understanding of who's on the line. But then there's the chat. You should be able to see the chat window. I'm not sure how many of you use GoToWebinar, but on the control panel, you'll see some handouts that are listed. So the slides from today are already preloaded. You'll be able to download those at any time during this. And we plan to get you out of here within the hour for sure. You'll be able to download those. You'll also be able to see Dr. Elam's bio. It's extensive. And you'll get to know her pretty well today. And you'll see why I'm excited to have her on this call for our members. So that's one of the ways. And then if you have a question, there's a question button where you on the panel where you can type an individual question to the panelist and we'll be able to respond. We've got some technical support people that are helping us in the background. So, we're not all experts in this, but we're moving forward. Moving on, this is a starting point. We cannot expect change overnight. We know that this conversation is the first of many for some. It's a long continuity for many others, but we want to make sure that we use this as real research as we're doing the 4-step process on how to tackle this issue. We want you to come with questions. I told you how we're going to be able to use them. And because we're at NSPRA, we help members. Members help members. We've seen this everywhere. Rich Fagan's been saying it for years. We're helping each other. So this is, even though the questions, you'll see the questions are pretty direct. Even though these questions are direct and they come to the point, this is all in the spirit of love. We want to make sure that members are helping each other. I know many people have come on here that are not a person of color, and they just want to know how they can help. How can they be a better ally? So we're going to talk about that today too. So here are the ways of engagement. I've already explained them. Polls, the chat box is there. The chat box is cool because if you type in the chat box, we're going to be able to record that as well. This is again being recorded. And so when you look at the screen, you'll be able to catch the chat as well, as I understand it. But regardless, I've got a fail-safe. I'm going to just copy and paste that bad boy before this thing is over, and then we'll put it into a PDF and send that out, because I often find that the chats on a webinar are some of the best content. People put hyperlinks in there for other resources. I think that's going to be really cool. And unfortunately, the polls don't give us the opportunity for open-ended questions. So we're going to use a chat box for that function too, or the questions, the question box. And I explained raise hands. So here we are. I want to start with the first poll that we can start to get the feel for it. So I'm going to ask 3 questions in the polls. Let's go ahead and launch that first poll. It'll take about 30 to 45 seconds while we leave that up for people to just click on it and see how that's working for them. We're getting great votes. So far, 75%. Okay, we've got a good on that one. If we can publish that poll so we can show the results. So right here, you can see how many people we've got. 82% of us are school PR professionals. No surprise there. We've got 4% of superintendents, some retired school PR professionals, and then others. This helps us understand who we are. We've got another question that I'd like to go up and throw now about your experience. So how long have you been in school PR? Great. Fantastic. We've got, let's go ahead and publish that one. So really nice mix. You know, it looks like the majority of us have been here between 4 and 7 years. So I had some experience and you know what we're doing, but we've got some 1 to 3 years. It looks like 0% right now on the call have less than a year. And then we've got some very strong veterans here bringing up the 10 years plus. So we're honored to have all of you here. The final question I'm going to ask in this segment, and then I'll ask the final 2 questions later on when we get to the questioning for Dr. Elam, has to do with how long you've been a member of NSPRA. So let's pop that question up. Great. Okay, let's publish that answer. This is unique. So we really are, we're broken up into 3s pretty much, but the main amount is between 4 and 7 years. We've got a small number of people who are not NSPRA members. They could be members of one of the state chapter SPRAs, which would be great. And then hopefully they'll get some value out of this and want to pursue membership. Just a plug for NSPRA on July 3rd, 12th and 13th, if I'm not mistaken, but check your emails. They're doing, for the first time ever, our seminar obviously being canceled. They're going to do an awesome virtual opportunity. I believe there's 20 sessions for $250. You'll have access to all of the sessions for the entire year. So go ahead and take a look at the NSPRA.org website to register for that. I think that that's an opportunity for people who are not NSPRA members to kind of take a look and see what kinds of stuff is there. There's going to be content that is like this one, actually a lot more like this. I believe there's going to be another diversity track, an equity track, so you'll hear from experts in our field. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring back up the slides and go from here. Why I put this 1955, remember that members are helping members. This is a big, this is a very big topic, you know, race, inclusion, equity, and diversity. And there are almost 2,000 NSPRA members. And so I think it's really important for us as members to kind of understand that we have the power as people who sit at the cabinet table often, the ones who are speaking on the microphone, to speak for those who don't speak for each other, or speak for themselves rather, excuse me. And so that number in particular just dawns on me because when we go to a conference, we see maybe half of this, maybe a third of this at our conferences, but our network goes so much further. And so I think it's really cool to know that we're not in this by ourselves. Here's what I know we can do with that number. You saw on the invitation that we're going to come together and discuss these topics, how they affect our members. Because, you know, in the past when I was on the board for Vice President for Diversity and Engagement, my whole focus was on this bottom part here, which is how do we affect the communities that we serve. But I do have to make an admission here that my focus on the members of NSPRA who are from diverse backgrounds, I really wasn't focused on that particular area. I was always thinking about, well, how do we help all of the members that 1955 reach the people that we serve, the students that we serve. And so this particular town hall is really targeted at our membership and targeted at how we can help people of color who are in our organization and people who are not of color who are in our organization address this topic and be a stronger NSPRA. There are three big beliefs from NSPRA that I pulled from the, of course, overall values, mission, belief systems that I think are pertinent to this. The first one is that we serve as the conscience of the organization. You can find this on the NSPRA website. Believe it's right there in About Us, mission, beliefs, and so forth. We serve as a conscience of the organization. We're the ones who, when we see something, we usually say something and we coach people how to say it. You know, and that also means, are we doing the right things? There's ethical considerations for all of it. We bring diverse schools and communities together and support success for all students. And then this last one, back several years ago when Julie Thanem out of Texas was president, she was focused on renewing our values and our missions and our beliefs. And I had an opportunity at the time to serve on the board, and we worked on this third one that was added, and it's building understanding and consensus around diversity and equity conditions facing public school communities. So if this is our beliefs, and these, well, there's a lot of them, but if these are the beliefs that we have gone out and said that we're going to be about, I think it's very important and timely and topical for us to be addressing these issues. I want to appreciate NSPRA for sending out their email, the latest one, where it really did address all of these issues and their commitment to continue to address them. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Elam. Again, her bio is extensive. She's a nationally recognized authority in diversity, equity, and cultural competence research and training for educational, business, governmental, and community agencies. On her background, which you'll see in the bio in your handouts, it's a laundry list of experience. She's from New York, had a lot of experience working around and in NYU. I'll tell you how I met Dr. Elam. She and I are both consultants for the U.S. Department of Education's Magnet School Assistance Program. And so we were stationed or airdropped working in New York City about 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was, Donna, where we were helping out schools in Brooklyn. And so if you know the New York City landscape, we were trying to catch planes at about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock rush hour, right? And so we shared a taxi from Brooklyn to LaGuardia Airport, and you would think we drove from Sacramento to San Francisco. I mean, it was about an hour and a half just to get there. But during that time, we got to know each other, got to talk a little bit about this, and really developed a mutual respect for her. I'm so grateful that she can join us to help answer these questions. The ones that I've written already, I'm going to show. But again, we want to hear from you. Before we go into the very first question, I want to ask the fourth of the 5 polls so we can get an understanding of who we're talking to right now, and that can help frame the context. So if we could put up that 4th poll right now, it would be really helpful. Let me see here. There it is. Okay, Let's go ahead and publish the results of the poll. So here's our numbers for today in the context of who we have on the call right now. And I would say, Dr. Elam, that these results are, I don't ever recall, and all my NSPRA members that are on here, if you don't mind just chiming in, I don't ever recall us polling for this question amongst our membership. But from my experience, at least at the seminar, this seems to be pretty consistent with who our organization is. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the questions. You can go ahead and drop that one. And we're going to go with our questions, but I want to pull this back up. Okay. So first question that I have here is for you, Dr. Elam. How do the recent deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others impact Black education professionals?
Okay. First of all, Stephen Nichols, thank you. I was impressed when I first met you several years ago, thanks to Dr. Walton, the MSAT Center, that federally funded center. They could have chosen people from all over the country, and you were chosen and vetted as one of those professionals that could impact schools that were some under desegregation orders. So that says a lot about the work and your vision and the lens that you have and what you bring to the table. But I wanted to make comment before this. I noticed the 1955, the membership, and I start thinking, 1955 is when the second Brown decision came in all deliberate speed. So I just wanted to make that correlation. We're talking about race, and it is the second. 1954 was Brown decision, and because it was in such a glacial move, about maybe a little over 1% of the nation's school districts actually desegregated because of the 1954 Civil Rights Act. It took another year, 1955, which is the reflection of your membership numbers, that all deliberate speed was added to it because nothing was happening in the country. So I just wanted to make that connection. If we look at things that sometimes is an omen. So we're all in pain. Our nation is in pain, individually, collectively, and right before I got on, I was checking my emails, and I had an email from one of my teachers. I work with districts all over the country, and this is a young lady that comes to a lot of the professional development work that I do on diversity and equity. And because of COVID, some of my summer institutes have been postponed, and many of them are now virtual. And her email, white female, said, she sent the email, she said, I couldn't wait until I saw you. I don't know what to say as a white female of what's going on to the country. That's how much pain she was, that she had to at least say it. That's what we're talking about in this whole conversation. I got emotional. I shared it with my daughter and my granddaughter, and we all looked at each other because that's where we are. That's where we are. And it represents the poll that we just looked at on your membership. We are all in this together. And I'm so happy to see the numbers that represent the voices of everyone who's at the table, because the onus is not on one group. We're actually part of history. And I think your role, the power that you have in your discipline to be the voice, to direct, to promote your agencies and your school districts, is to have your finger on the pulse of what's important. And so we're going to talk about some of that. So we're in some painful times, but they're also revolutionary times. And I think transformational times. We have multiple crises going on. You know, when we look at the news even today, we see the civil rights unrest, And I know that we know that it's impactful in our country, but all 50 states are involved with the protests and
Yep.
over 18 countries in the world.
Wow.
Even on the parliament, they have Black Lives Matter. And so it's impacted the world, and we're seeing conversations with many civil rights leaders. What's different about this time in history that we see? And it's because it represents your poll that's on this webinar. We are all hurt by it. We are all speaking out, and we're all doing what we can do. Like that young lady who sent me the email, like the things that you'll do after this webinar, and you probably have done some of it already. So it's devastating, but it's in the backdrop of a pandemic. And I don't know if people understand the significance of people who were afraid to leave, not afraid, but
Right. To leave.
so sheltered
Yeah.
in place, but to come out with their mask,
Right.
because it resonated that strongly. I mean, history is going to really unpack that, because that's quite significant. But the pandemic began to highlight all of these inequalities that we have. And I received calls when we first had the pandemic, and I think it was Chicago who first reported the disproportionality of the numbers of African Americans that were impacted by COVID. And I had college, because we're doing diversity work in our schools, so they wanted to know, let's find out why are we seeing that? Because it's all connected. Just because I do diversity work in schools to look at the achievement gap, the interconnection across all levels of society and all aspects of society are unequal. And
Right.
so we have had conversations siloed before, education, we look at health. But when we look at, and what we really, and you're hearing this a lot in the reports, systemic racism. And I think it's important for your discipline to understand what that means. It means that it's what impacts us every single day in every aspect of life. So the pandemic exposed the kinds of inequalities that happen in health. So it was the health field that really started the whole conversation on cultural competence. It wasn't the educational field. And that was 1989. They started to say, if we understand the cultural backgrounds and beliefs that people have and their practices, we can be more effective in serving them and being more effective to understand that. So cultural competence didn't start in education. It started in the health field. As researchers, we took those competencies to try to transpose them into education. Okay, and so that's a major piece. So when we're looking at systemic racism, because this is what's systemic and the impact that the killings have, it brought our attention to inhumanity and injustice, that it has existed, but because we have technology and social media now, it affected us different because we actually saw it, and it's not going away, but it's occurred. This has happened over and over. That's why we have diversity training, because of the kinds of things that have happened in our country in the past. But I think it hit people in a different way because of the photos and the experience. So what I'm doing this summer with my summer institutes, my conversation on talking about equity and diversity is very different because it's not abstract anymore. I don't have to show graphic pictures to say, this is what we mean by equality, this is what we mean by equity. We're all in this boat together. We see it, it's real. And it helps us to bring it to, I guess, a relevant place that now we're going to talk, we can move into a transformation. So we're looking at the wealth gap. We're looking at employment. We're looking at housing discrimination. We're looking at government surveillance. We're looking at incarceration. We're looking at drug arrests. We're looking at immigration arrests. We're looking at infant mortality. We're looking at health disparities, the achievement gap. So that's why I think this era is looking at all the interconnectivity that inequality affects. Okay, so that's part of it. Um, I'm working with some school districts that are reviewing their policies. Do their policies keep those inequalities going, or do they help correct or remedy them? So we're looking at policies and practices, and that's what I would recommend as you advising your school districts and agencies that you represent, that they really need to right now, immediately. And everything that we're talking about is to be done immediately, not down the road. Look at policies to see how they're impacting practices of disparate treatment, review, and then revise. And it's not about one person doing that, the teams and the voice, the authentic voice of all the people who will be impacted and who will impact need to be at the table. For you to be really positioned to focus on what the root causes are. Next week, there's superintendents who are calling me that can I help relay the message. The good thing is that people wanted to know when I was working on my dissertation on desegregation, they were like, why would you study desegregation? I don't
Right.
know why. It was his journey, Stephen, right?
Yeah.
That I was just fascinated with it. Growing up in New York, for whatever reason, I've been fascinated with how do we bring people together. My focus at that time was multicultural ed. Now it's cultural competence, it's understanding, it's equity. That's where my writing is in transformation on systems and in leadership. So, but my dissertation was studying
Segregation.
how, yeah, I was studying desegregation, and that's what the magnet schools, the federally funded magnet schools stand for, and that's why we do that work.
Do you get this question, Dr. Elam, about is there still desegregation? Because anytime I fly somewhere and I tell people that I'm going to work with a school district that has a grant with MSAP, and I say, well, they say, well, what is that? I said, well, it's designed for desegregation. And they're like, I thought that already happened.
Then that happened in the 60s.
Yeah.
We have over 150 school districts still under desegregation orders. I helped design the Lee versus Macon case in the state of Alabama.
Yes.
And that's still going on. We designed that in 2002. They have to be certified because some people mistake the lack of access and opportunity and blame the victim. So if you don't have access and you're a struggling learner, how do we keep blaming children for not being able to perform? So the state, what it was disproportionality of African American children being referred to special ed as an intervention instead of looking at changing the way teachers taught. So yeah, desegregation is alive and well. I was on a Zoom call because we couldn't meet in person last week with a superintendent, Department of Justice, the Anti-Defamation League, the school board, and their lawyers to talk about how can we remedy the disproportionality of discipline, because we see disproportionate numbers of African Americans and Hispanics, Latinos being referred to on discipline issues. So that's alive and well. Yes, Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I want to ask a question, and it's a general question, and I think it's really good one. And these questions are pouring in. So if you see my eyes moving around, it's because I'm
Okay.
just trying to manage the questions on the panel here. But I've got a great question. You did say that we're in position to be the voice of our organizations for what we do in our profession. What advice can you give to us when we have leaders who silence our voice? School system
Leaders.
leaders. Yeah. So like if you have a school district cabinet or superintendent or board who doesn't feel comfortable with making a statement right now on
Mm-hmm.
these things, other ways to even sideline you if they feel like you might bring bring too much heat to them. How do you work with people that are still gathering courage in this particular area? What advice would you give us?
Okay. It's
That's a
perfect because I received a call yesterday to
uh
help a school district, and they just wanted a session, and then they wanted to film me and then roll it out as a diversity session. And I said, no way. I said, that's part of the problem. So what I advise all of you to do is to really gather your research and your data and disaggregate your data. That builds your case. The facts speak volumes. All of the things that I mentioned, there are disparities in every one of those that we talked about. But for education, all we have to do is look at the achievement gap. All we have to do is look at the discipline referrals.
mhm.
We look at who's taking honors gifted classes. We can look at the special ed referrals. We can look at the demographics of the student population and then compare that to the demographics of the teaching population. And then again, look at the leadership. What we know, all of the research says this, that when you have a diverse body of leadership, the voice is authentic so that you can identify what the key issues are.
Yeah,
So then you become problem solvers rather than plugging up the dam to stop the water here and then the water pops out in another spot. So when you have a voice, authentic voice of people that it's going to impact and that the work and it informs you as you're impacting. I was looking at Governor Cuomo this morning,
mhm.
and they just, uh, I don't know if it's passed yet, but they introduced legislation to address law enforcement and some legislation that is going to impact what has happened with George Floyd. And they had a whole list of the other people impacted. That's what we're talking about, transformational change. When we impact policy, we create legislation. So when you're prepared and you go to the root cause and you put your data together and you present it to who you represent, you ask them, do what is your legacy? Do you want your legacy to be about this? You've spent 20 or 30 years in this field. Do you want to leave out with a legacy that ends up on the news
Right,
because you didn't do the right thing? We
right.
are supplying you with the information, and data is important. So laying it out, disaggregating the data will help them with the decision, and your recommendations are aligned to that data.
Awesome.
Does that help, Stephen?
It does. It really does. And I'm we're getting a lot of questions that are coming in. And I want to move forward with the questions that we
Okay.
have. Well, because there's so much content. I think what will happen, but just for everybody that's out there asking questions, they're starting to come in. Go ahead and put them in there because we've got them in queue. So like, if we can get through the slides, what we'll do is we'll just rapid fire pepper those questions. And then if some
Okay.
of you raise your hand, virtually raise your hand, I can unmute your microphone and then you can ask those questions too. So that'll be real good. Let's move on to the next one that we have here. What do people of color need to know about dealing with bias in the in the workplace, in their professional association? There's 82, and this goes with the question about there's 82% of the attendees on this particular call are white, and that's illuminating, and I'm sure that many are wondering how to talk about race without being subjects of labels and placing labels on others. So when we start to go into the concept of being an ally, which is another question, I want to know what you would say to the minority population on this particular call about what they need to know about bias and so forth in the profession. What are your thoughts on
Okay.
that?
For the minority population, I want to start there and then I'll go to these bullets. For the
Yeah,
minority population, the conversation can be very emotional for us because this is what we live every single day. And so we pick and choose what we address. So many things on a daily basis we dismiss because you cannot challenge everything. So that's our life. It is exhausting
Mhm.
that you don't address every single thing that happens that could be offensive, that could be teachable moments. I think we have to prepare ourselves to be in those teachable moments and to share it with not with animosity, about learning about each other.
Yeah,
Um, I've had schools. I rolled out Just Mercy. You know, they're offering that anybody on the line. there it's free. A
Okay.
number 13th is free. They have a number of the like Netflix and a lot of the stations are offering movies and documentaries free right now. So take advantage of June, because who knows what will happen after that. But
Right.
it is to read, it's to understand, because we have to be, I think, for the minority professionals on the line, prepare yourselves on how you will respond as much
Yep.
as possible, so that it doesn't become a hot button or a trigger for you to be offended with people who are and being inquisitive, and they want to find out. Okay, there's certain, and it's a line on that, but just be understanding that sometimes it's uncomfortable for people to even ask because they don't know how to ask.
Yeah.
Setting a tone and opportunities to have those forums, and I think I have that, is to be really encouraging those kinds of sessions, that we get a chance to talk in a safe environment, that we really talk about the issues with an outcome. I wouldn't just have conversations unless it has a outcome,
Okay.
that we're intentional about it. But be prepared, because people do want to know. I'm getting texts of educators who are white are saying, Donna, I just can't believe this is happening. I'm so sorry. I understand that part, but let's talk about what the real issues are. And so prepare yourself on how to respond.
Mm,
Okay,
that's
because
good.
because it's going to be emotional.
And it
It's
is.
going to be emotional. I can tell you, it's going to trigger you. They're going to be hot buttons, but we have to also be part of the solution of, if people are asking, what can I do? When I go into schools, I ask them, what are the barriers to effective instruction when it comes to the cultural backgrounds and experiences of children? And I don't put it in a I take it so that they handwrite it, and I take it, otherwise they won't answer me honestly, because I want you to tell me, I don't know enough about this cultural group. Can you help me? What do I do? That's what I want to hear. You
Okay.
know, if I see this culture doesn't value education, or it's a culture of poverty, I understand where I have to go with my professional development. So we have to prepare ourselves on how we're going to respond to the questions, and they're coming.
There's a question that came in, and you were talking about June and the free content that's going on with Just Mercy 13. If this is a great question, if our district cabinet had a book study, what are the top 3 books that you would recommend?
Oh,
Yeah, I've got one, because I saw this. I'm going to give this one first. I saw this brother. He's a New Yorker, huh?
Singletary.
Dr.
Great. Go ahead. Let me hear who.
Christopher Emden. He wrote a book called "For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood." Have you read that one?
I've seen the title, because I'm pulling books for teaching African American adolescents,
Okay.
uh, and I've been ordering books like crazy so I can
Yeah.
share strategies. Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. Christopher Emden. He teaches at NYU Teachers College, or not NYU, Columbia.
Columbia.
And yeah, Columbia. And he was in California. My business partner, Tom DeLapp, and I were speaking at the Association for California School Administrators. That room looks a lot like this room. And you should have seen the way that he came in. And at first I was like, oh my God, this guy's going so far off the rails, because he was just very like in your face with it. But I realized what he was doing was he was trying to replicate the feeling that a minority student would feel in an environment like this. And it was just powerful work. By the time he was done with his session, he had people running up to him. They were trying to get his book signed, all the above. So that's a great one. And
That's a good one.
yeah, I just got a text that says, we're going to copy all the questions and answer them in an email. So, and the questions, again, we're doing this, we want this to be members helping members. So we're not going to make this, we're going to associate your question with your name. So don't let your name worry about it. We're going to just take the questions. They're going to be anonymous. So put any question you possibly can, and don't worry about it, because we promise we're gonna make sure that we just get the answers to the questions. Donna, do you have?
Can I make it? I would like to make a suggestion. Courageous Conversations with Singleton.
Yeah,
That's
Lindsay,
another good one. But what
absolutely.
I'd like to do, make a recommendation, is that let me pull some pieces together to send you, so that you can send out to the membership. And I
Yeah,
gather they want it for adult information, because often teachers are asking for students. But
yeah, they would absolutely love it. So I know you have a couple of these that you want to address, but I want to be able to get questions from the audience, and really see, given the fact with the number of attendees we have, I wanted to get to this question in particular, because I know you have a lot to say about this one. Can you please address the concept of being an ally? And before you do, I've heard this term only used in the past, at least, when it was pertaining to diversity conversations with LGBT plus communities. And now I'm hearing it all over, given what's been going on in our country. So I think this would be the main takeaway, I think, for our members, because I will tell you, the heart of our membership is awesome. It's amazing. Everybody here I would say that we're mission-oriented people, we're passionate people, and we are, quote unquote, some of the wokest brothers and sisters you'll find in a professional association. And so I feel like we just need help. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on being an ally.
So our allies, because when I first started doing diversity work, this is when I knew that this was my passion. I didn't allow the jokes, even though I wasn't participating in this, any slurs. If I heard it, sometimes I would walk away. People knew I was dissatisfied with the conversation, and I would walk away. I knew there was transformation happening years ago when I decided to say, that's not appropriate for me. So people started, family members included, and colleagues would see me arrive, and they go, here comes, of course, they called me, here comes We Love the World, when I walked into the room. But they knew, whether it was family or friends, that I would make my stand. That's part of being an ally, because what the 82% in the poll that is on participating in this, it's one thing um, for you to believe something, but the action, the intent that you have has to turn into action, and that's the difference, I think, of this movement. And that means that because you have power and influence because of the mere numbers, and you're in those positions, that you also become the voice of the people that you represent. So changing those policies is going to be important. So it's taking the intent. That's where the gap is. It's going from intent to action, immediate. So what I'm seeing different in this movement, and I don't know what they are going to call it. What I'm calling it is an anti-racist and equity movement. It's different than what we have done before. Before, we've mitigated. We might have advocated for a child, or we might have mentored a colleague. But now we're talking about, let's go to the root. Why don't we see enough of the children that are really excelling academically? Why don't we see enough professionals in your field? So now we're mentoring, but we're looking at what are the policies that prevent that from happening. That's the difference, I believe, of this movement.
Okay.
What you're seeing all over, and I'm getting them every single day, from McDonald's to Walmart to school districts, everybody is making their public statement of committing to peaceful protest or Black Lives Matter or whatever that statement is. And everyone that is part of the change is doing that. We did not see that before. You would see mission statements that said, we believe in all people, that kind, but you didn't see any action that tied to it. I have received from all the companies in my network, they are making public statements, and that's what an ally does. That's what an ally agency and organization does.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a beginning. Um, really being at the table, not just have one meeting, but be that voice in its multiple meetings with the community, with the school district, with stakeholders that would not normally have or hear the balance story as we are talking about addressing inequality. And that takes courage, because that's going to be some of your friends.
Yep.
And that's what an ally is. That's what's different than, oh, I really believe in this, but then I turn my back when my friend makes racist comments. And I've been in settings with colleagues that I have visited them in their homes, deputy superintendents and superintendents, and their families might say something that we used to call off color. They have
Yeah.
stood up in front of me and said, that is inappropriate. That's offensive. Even if they didn't, it wasn't intentional. I don't think it was just their normal conversation, but they let them know that wasn't appropriate. This is my friend. Those kind of things cannot be said.
Yep.
Instead of me having to get up and leave because of the slur or the comment. So I think if we all have that collective voice, I think professional development is going to be key of addressing implicit bias,
Yep.
racism, discrimination, and really understanding what those terms are. The clarification of the terms, identify the root causes, and then become problem solvers. We need to spend more time to identify the root cause, then we can have a sustainable solution. So does that help?
It does tremendously. And as you're speaking, questions are just pouring in. So I want to read a couple of them. Uh, let's see here. How do we go beyond just a statement? And I think you were alluding to this by what we're doing in our meetings, which in so many cases is simply checking a box for school systems because our neighbor school districts did the same. You know, what do you say? How do we go beyond just a statement? That's a great question.
That is. So the statement should reflect the policy. So I would begin by seriously reviewing, and that's not with one person, that's a team of people that represent all your stakeholders, to review the policies, look at the practices, and see if the policies and the practices are impacting groups differently. I'll give you an example. What is that? Zero tolerance policies.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example.
Yep.
Zero tolerance policies, because I do a lot of work with law enforcement and FBI governmental groups. Zero tolerance came out of the 80s on the war on drugs in New York for the abandoned buildings.
Right.
It was never meant to slip into the schools. But you know, when you don't have people at the table with institutional knowledge, things slip in. And so when that slipped in, it doubled the referrals of minority students to discipline. And that was not the intent of it. So now we're stuck with these zero. So challenging things like that. What could we do better? We could do restorative justice. We could have education about, behavior and things like that, so that we have ownership. And that's where we're going. Stephen, you and I have always talked about this, but I think it took a shakeup in our society to see how this behavior was impacting people, and death impacts you to the ultimate. It's just not dropping out of school; it's death. And yeah, go ahead.
It's an opportunity. You said this earlier. I don't think we're ever going to get this much attention on this topic ever again. And if we just let this go and be a part of the history books and let that be it, I don't think we'll ever get this much support for this particular cause. So while we have everyone's attention on this, we need to take action now while people are paying attention.
And you advise, your association advises, you have so much power. So when you create the best practices and you pull the best practices from the different entities and model it yourself, that's where your impact. This is so significant for the influence that you have as communicators of what should be. Whether people resist it, they're going to resist, because it's not, It's not easy, especially when it's the same kind of thing that we said when you said, what about the minorities who are facing bias? All of this is going to impact us emotionally because it's addressing beliefs and values, and it's generational. It's not just our beliefs, it's what our parents taught us, it's what our teachers taught us, it's what our ministers have. So we're shaking up a system that we have to, that's why going to the root cause is so important. And how you get to the root cause, you look at your data and you ask, corporations do this. You look at what the data reports, and then you ask why. And when you get that answer, then you ask why. And when you get that answer, you ask why 5 times until you get to the root cause of what the situation is. Otherwise, it is a band-aid solution. So if we
Yeah,
want sustainable solutions, we have to look at the structural inequalities and look at the root, and then together we come and say, how can we remedy this?
yeah,
Okay.
great. Another question from the audience. How do we respond to community members who want to solve the problem by volunteer tutoring and or mentoring and don't have awareness of systemic injustice? I don't know how to tell people that that's not enough without sounding self-righteous or unappreciative. By the way, I'm white. Great question.
It's a great question. In one of my school systems, United Way had volunteers to go into the urban settings. They were affluent individuals, and they had this funding, so they were going into the project. And when the executive director of that branch said to me, what do you recommend? I was like, your volunteers are not going to last unless they understand the community and
Mm,
understand what has to happen and the hurt that they may hear from children of what they're going through. Because once you build a relationship in a community, you're going to hear the good, bad, and ugly. And so, how do you prepare them for the experiences that they may not understand? And so, what we did, orientation projects. So, we do orientations on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the universities. We do that with vendors. We actually do that with even substitute teachers. And we did that with the volunteers for United Way so that they were better prepared. They didn't know what they didn't know until the first experience. I said, they're going to have more questions after they go. So we prepared them. And then we met with them again to revisit, what are your challenges? What really surprised you? How can we help you understand or be more impactful? The children resonated with they looked, their eyes would light up when they saw those volunteers come into the building. But they had to understand how to build those relationships. Because remember, people that have been in very untrusting relationships, it's going to take a while. It doesn't take, just because you're there and you go, I'm here to help, doesn't mean that people will receive that help. So relationship building is going to be key, and people are going to watch if you're consistent with the volunteerism, sticking there and being there unconditionally. So
absolutely.
training and orientation are going to be important on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I want to ask ask you one more question for the audience. I'm looking at the clock and we are just going through time. So I want to end with your advice on NSPRA. But before I do that, let me pull one more question that just came in that I thought was really good. And I want your perspective on this, and I agree. I'm curious about talking about poverty and race. Do we need to acknowledge that they go together? That supports for children in poverty are also supports for people of color. What is your take on that? Because I'm not sure I necessarily agree that they always go together, but I'm not the expert in this area and you are. What is your thought?
Because we have disproportionate numbers of Black Americans, and I'm saying Black purposely, Black
Yes.
Americans and Latino Americans in poverty. Okay, but it's not the same. It's not a cause and effect. It's because of this whole structural inequality that we see those numbers. Okay. So, and this has been I've had to write for some school districts for their school boards to address it. You cannot substitute the research on poverty, which there's a lot out there, alone to substitute talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can combine it so that you understand it. The reason why, because of that disproportionate number of minorities in poverty, it compounds their lack of access and opportunity and experiences, but it's not a cause and effect. Okay, so I do a lot of work with the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights, and school districts would say, oh, we're going to do, I don't want to name the groups, poverty training. I'll just use that because there are a few camps out there who do poverty training. Some are very good. They did not accept that as a diversity strategy, not standalone. You have to still address diversity, equity, and inclusion, even if you want to look at poverty. Okay.
Okay. I
So
like
it's
that.
not a substitute. I'll put it that way. It's not a substitute for diversity.
Well, when you mentioned the books, Glenn Singleton, Courageous Conversations, he's got several in a series now with that particular concept. But I was working in Natomas Unified in California, which in 2006, New York Times called it the second most diverse school district in the country. And and it was really, I mean, 25% Black, 25% white, 25% Hispanic, 25% Asian. Just a real nice salad there of races and ethnicities. But when we were in the cabinet room and when we would talk, the conversations were by and large about language. They were about was it free and reduced lunch or socioeconomic. We would talk about achievement gap, but we wouldn't talk about racial achievement gap. And so that's kind of where my initial reaction to when I hear things like, yeah, we can talk about poverty and people of color and realize that there's a connection. But I think that if we don't ever talk about race, we won't talk about race. And we have to talk about that too. So I think that that's my sense on it. Yeah.
And Stephen, you hit a point because, and it's about 10 years ago that we had to write a lot of papers for superintendents to speak to it. It takes the onus off of the problem because what can we do other than look at policies and do something with the community? But what can we do? It's not in our sphere of influence, immediate, to do something about poverty. So you can dismiss that. Race, you cannot. And that's what the difference is. And we had to really build that up because a lot of schools were substituting poverty research and strategies and thinking that that was okay. It was offensive to many people of color. And it dismisses the whole issue of inequality. Yeah. We don't have racism as the core of our American ethos. That's taught. That's taught by example, by policy, from enslavement. And we have to understand that. So when we're working with schools, we actually take them through going from Plessy and 58 years later, reversing Plessy of separate institutions to the Brown decision in 1954. We walk our teachers, before we start talking about instructional strategies, we walk them through what does that mean when you dehumanize people intentionally, when they don't have rights. Those vestiges of segregation are still part of some of the policies and practices that are in our country. That's why this piece is so important about anti-racism, the work that is ahead of us.
Man, that's perfect. Given the fact that we have hit our time period of an hour, I want to first and foremost thank you, Dr. Elam, for what you can tell that this is your wheelhouse. You're passionate about it. And I think what you've done for our members is you made us feel comfortable in having this conversation. We need a big sister. We need a coach. We need someone to hold our hand through this process. And I could have thought of no one better than you to come and do this. So I wanted to thank you for this. I've already gotten emails and a couple text messages privately about how to bring you out to do this work for school districts on the call. So I will definitely put you in touch with those individuals. And I want to make sure that when we send the information out to everyone and on my website, I'll have your contact information so they can reach you directly. Because I think that, yeah, I think you would be phenomenal working with this group. Working with these groups. You work with school districts already, you know our language, you've been here, so I think that would be important. I have two other questions that I was going to ask that I'm not going to now because we have to drop off, but I did want to address what we should be doing as a professional association. What you've done for me is you've given me some impetus and some framework of what I want to do for this platform for change for NSPRA, and so I got your notes that you wrote out for us, and we'll be able to have those conversations offline, you and I, as we consider this information. But as I wrap up, this was an early part of the process. We want to know from NSPRA members, are they, do they want to do a survey? You know, do we feel comfortable? What do we expect from association leadership? So really, for the sake of time, I want to just let everybody know how they can get this information. I'm going to, for everyone that registered, and again, it was over 100 people, we're going to send you out the slides, the recording, the questions that come in, the anonymous questions. Dr. Elam's putting together a book list for us so we can figure out some books that we can look at, all the above. So that's going to be there. We're also going to have this available for people who did not show up. So on my website, nicholsforinspra.com, you'll be able to find that information because I'll archive this as part of the events. We've got several events planned with subject matter experts in lots of different areas over the course of the next few months. So I just want to say thanks. Thanks again. Thank you to everyone that's here. We appreciate it. You can go ahead and drop off the call. We thank you much. I'm gonna,
keep leading by example, and that's what you're doing, Stephen. This is what we're talking about. That's part of the solution. So keep that mindset, because you really do believe in bringing people together. I've seen you do that in other places, but this is what we're talking about. We have to be at the table together across disciplines. So I'm honored that I had the chance to talk with you and your membership. And good luck with everyone, and be safe and healthy.
Thank you. You too. And everybody, I appreciate you coming on. We are 5 minutes past, so I'll let you guys go ahead and get lunch. And if you have, I'm going to leave this open for a few more minutes. So if you have any questions that you put into the question box, I want to be able to capture them. So go ahead and put this in there, and the chat box as well. So I'm going to leave this open for another 2 to 3 minutes, but you guys can go ahead and drop off. And if you want to raise your hand, and I can unmute you if you have a couple comments or questions. I'm committed to sticking around for a few more minutes. Okay, but thanks everybody, I appreciate it.
And I can leave?
You can, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you so much. Have a good one. I'll follow up with you offline, Donna.
Okay, thank you.